Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from the past couple weeks about 90 Day Fiancé and Darcy and Stacey. Darcy and Stacey number 73. This is the episode in which Darcy goes on a date with the guy with the chocolate. Willie says, I could see the chocolate setup being stimulating if they were closer together and had to lick the chocolate off of each other's fingers maybe. But the way they're doing it, it just reminds me of how my 4-year-old nephew and niece eat. I don't know. I mean, a first date with someone, you're licking off their... I mean, you don't know where their hands have been, and that's pretty intimate and in public. And yeah, absolutely, it did look like the way a 4-year-old would eat. Still says, you know the pseudo-spiritual woo-woo grift is bad when even mismanifestation can smell the BS from a mile away. There's a lot said in that short comment. Darcy and Stacey 74. Julie says, I am just going to throw this out there, but does anyone see a connection that Darcy and Stacey are always trying to look younger and date younger guys because their father left their mother for a younger woman when they were teenagers? That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I knew that necessarily. Do we know that? But if so, yeah, that could be a factor. The way it works out is, as a child, you might feel we don't know because we haven't heard, but you can imagine a scenario like that where the twins feel alone, rejected, hurt, abandoned. They long for the father. You know, there seems to be some kind of interesting dynamic with the mom and the dad, their personalities, the way they treat the mom versus the way they treat the dad. But anyway, so it's possible that, you know, they're 10 years old and they're longing for their dad. They miss him. They feel rejected. And of course, that creates a lot of issues. But one of them is that in the family, and maybe even you watch your mom, I don't know, I'm just completely speculating, but you watch your mom pining after him, and then you see your dad marry someone that's younger, and he seems happier, at least from afar. And you're like, ooh, that's the way to go. That's the good life. And you also internalize it subconsciously of that is me. We tend, you know, our parents' identities, their personalities, their behavior, we internalize because it seems as though we evolved to do that. It's a way of passing culture and knowledge. In the ancient times, it would be the knowledge of what berries to eat and what berries not to eat. You know, what snakes are dangerous and what snakes are not dangerous and that sort of thing. How to tell if water is good to drink or when to know that an area is safe. These things, kids will look at their parents and probably evolve, you know, they were selected to really prefer and mimic their parents and just internalize their behavior because it's probably more often a benefit than a problem. So I don't know, maybe there's something along those lines, or at least a lesson was learned by them that that's the road to happiness or something. Anyway. Also, when we feel abandoned by people, when we feel harmed by people, we have various different ways of coping with it. And one of the ways is to actually become them. There's a fantasy that if we become them, then they will finally accept us. Going on with the comment. As well as they were bullied, so they were also bullied for being a little overweight in elementary school. Really? I didn't know. I mean, I knew that they were ostracized, but I didn't know they were bullied for being overweight. I mean, I could have heard them say that, but I don't remember it. I'll take your word for it. I see their body dysmorphia as a trauma response to those things. And Darcy, dating younger men, could be a trauma response to the fact that she may be getting older as a negative thing in themselves as well as others because of their father. Anyone? Yeah, those are perfectly fine hypotheses. If we had a chance to talk with them, we could ask them what they felt about it. Darcy and Stacey 75, Stella's Farm Life says, I think filters, so I was talking about filters on phones and how it could really create a problem for people. And I was wondering, though, if the problem has always been there, right? Because of commercials and advertisements. And the filters is just a new manifestation of that. But I don't know, we'll have to see as time goes on. I suspect that it's just getting worse and worse, as you can even see kind of on the show. Stella says, I think the filters on phones are more damaging than touched up magazine photos. Now children are taking pictures of themselves and always seeing themselves with a filter. Then they don't like what they see when they look in the mirror. As much as I have my own insecurities, I stay away from the filters because I think it's worse for self-esteem. Yeah, I suppose even beyond children, we should think about for ourselves, because, when you use these filters, it'll erase 25 years off your life. It's pleasant to look at if you're struggling with getting older, or you don't like the wrinkles in your skin, or you feel like you're being rejected because of your age. It definitely makes us potentially feel better, right? And I think, what you're saying is wise, is like, even though it might be tempting, it's sort of like playing with the devil, because if you start actually using those filters and starting to post those pictures, then how do you go back? And you start to get seduced into this idea, and it becomes this expectation, and you're playing into the madness. And really, I don't know if I talked about it in the video. I think for all of us, as we get older, it's an important part of mental wellness and life wellness is the true wrestling with age and death and decline of your body and your mind and transitioning into the next phase of life gracefully as you can. And it's a struggle. And there's not a lot of good models out there. A lot of the people we hold up as models, as people that we find inspirational for people that age, are people that age really well. Your Christy Brinkley's, your Dolly Partons. These people age really well and say, oh, they're so graceful, it's so great. And great, it's wonderful, but it's largely genetic. I guess it's partially lifestyle. But there's not a lot you can do about the things that happen to your body and the things that happen to your skin and to your brain. There are things you can do, and obviously talk with your physician about preventative measures, of course, but it's inevitable. So yeah, I just don't feel like we have a lot of talk that is constructive. The internet is really dominated by younger people, which makes sense. So I'm guessing that in 20 years, 30 years, there will be a much more robust aging discourse on the internet that is not necessarily as present today. Going on here, Darcy and Stacy 76. Melissa says, I had to write your statement down that you said, Dr. Kirk. If people leave me, someone else will love me because I am a lovable person. It's so simple, yet so easy to forget. Yeah, so what I was talking about, I probably was jealousy. That's usually when I'm talking about that. Or on desperation. So whether it's jealousy or desperation in dating or in early relationships or even long-term relationships, it's important to try to cultivate strong attachments and to value that and to put energy into it, work at it, value it. And at the same time, if it's intolerable to your soul that someone would leave you, then you might resort to some things that will be self-destructive, might even push the other person away, right? Being hypervigilant, being jealous, watching their every move, being controlling, being annoyingly demanding, that kind of thing. When you have worries of infidelity in your partner, of course, check in, cultivate the relationship, maybe ask, hey, you're not cheating on me, right? You can certainly ask for reassurance. Or, hey, okay, you're going to Vegas with your friends. Could you maybe just text me every once in a while? It'll just help me. But at the end of the day, your partner can still cheat on you regardless of everything that you do. You could do everything right. You could be the best partner. You could be well-balanced. You could put energy into the relationship. You could check in. You could make sure that they're happy. You could talk about all the things. You go to therapy, and your partner can still cheat on you. It just happens. And that it doesn't usually happen under those circumstances, but it can. And the denial of that reality sometimes causes people to assume that if they do everything right, it won't happen. It's not likely. And if you find the right people, and like I said, you cultivate the relationship and you go to a lot of therapy, then it's not likely to happen. But, it's just one of those things that could happen. It's sort of like with parenting. There's a similar, more important, I think, more common threshold that you have to move past, which is this notion that you can prevent anything bad happening to your children. Of course, do everything you can, absolutely, particularly early childhood, to prevent anything bad happening to your children. But you can't control everything, and some bad things will happen. And you just have to accept that and say, well, I'm going to do everything I can, but I can't control everything, and I can't beat myself up if an occasional bad thing happens within reason. And I also can't attempt to control all spheres of my child's life, because although I might be able to, to a greater degree prevent certain bad things happening, I might create bad things by limiting them and giving them the impression that the world is a very scary place, which is very damaging to children. Darcy and Stacy 78. Natalie says, so Natalie's quoting me. Apparently I seem to remember this. I said, Americans are very phobic of a lot of things south of the Boofy, because I was talking about, I think, body shame and sex shame. So Natalie says, the way Dr. Kirk so casually said that, it made me spit my tea. Yeah. I mean, I almost spit my tea if I was drinking it at the time when I said it, sometimes, I mean, just that word, Boofy. Darcy and Stacy, number 79. Belle Petite says, it's like she wants to be a trophy wife. It's like Darcy wants to be a trophy wife of a successful 25-year-old Instagram model, like she wants a successful man to spoil her like her father has, which is another possible reason why we see the behavior we do. But simultaneously, she wants the exotic, attractive younger partner, presumably like her father went for. It just seems like a recipe to constantly be dissatisfied and disappointed. Yeah, so that often is a contradiction, right? You're looking for the trophy wife, or the trophy husband, I suppose, and you're also looking for someone that will spoil you with a lot of money and fancy cars and trips and stuff and clothes. And so it does seem like a recipe to be constantly dissatisfied and disappointed. I mean, yeah, I don't know. If we oriented Darcy in a different direction towards one or the other, I still don't think that she would find satisfaction. I think that there are other issues at play. All right, Lacey says, I am in my graduate program with my end goal as receiving a license in clinical social work. I'm currently taking my psychopathology and assessment course. I see Darcy as having dependent personality disorder. She meets all the criteria. Okay, so let me talk about this for a second. You are a student, you took one class, or you're in the middle of the class, and I recommend listening to my deep dive on dependent personality disorder. It's for patrons. And also, maybe listen to all my episodes on personality disorders. 2, we can't diagnose from afar, so we can't say that Darcy has dependent personality disorder. We can say that she shows some signs, maybe. We can say that, given what we're seeing on the show, it kind of looks like this, but we can't say, because that's what you said. I'm slipping into professor supervisor mode, as you might tell. So you say, I see Darcy as having dependent personality disorder. I mean, there's a little tentativeness there. I see Darcy as having, but we want to be careful, because as a clinician, your clinical voice begins now. You're in graduate school. And if you're going to put yourself out there, especially on the internet, and say such things, there are professional consequences to that. Lay people can diagnose, and there's not a problem in terms of their ethics or their profession, but you're a professional now, and so you can't do that. I'm not yelling at you. The other thing I'll say is that personality disorders in general are very complicated, and taking a class on psychopathology in general, like for those who don't know, typically in your graduate school program, especially at the master's level, there's usually just 1 or 2 classes on psychopathology. And in those 2 classes, you have to cover the entirety of the DSM. And this is dense, right? It's, over 1,000 pages, and each disorder takes up about 2 or 3 pages. So just do the math on that. And it's even just one chapter you could spend 10 years trying to figure out and get like only 50% the wisdom required to be able to diagnose. Now, some things in the DSM are pretty easy. There are phobias or mood disorders that are pretty easy to learn and understand once you study it. It's not simple, but it's easier. Personality disorders are not that. It could be argued that the chapter on personality disorders is the most difficult to master. So I just want to say that as well. But let's go through the criteria and talk about Darcy. Again, I can't know anything because I can only go off of what we see on the show. So dependent personality disorder, in a nutshell, these individuals believe they're incompetent. That's how I frame it. It's not usually the way it's framed, but it's the way I have experienced it with clients, is that they just adamantly believe that they are incompetent. They are underfunctioners. They often will have an overfunctioner or a codependent person over them. And the dependent personality disordered individual, at their core, believes that they are incompetent, they can't do things on their own, and they will do anything to avoid doing things on their own or being independent. Not because they're trying to manipulate things, it's because they literally believe that they can't do anything on their own. And when you don't practice things because you assume you're going to mess it up, then you don't get good at things. So you could have a 35-year-old dependent personality disordered individual, and they legit are not very good at things. But ever since they were 15 years old, they've been avoiding learning things like getting a job or living on their own or paying bills or taking care of someone or making their own dentist appointment. So that is the core of dependent personality disorder. So let's look through the criteria. Difficult making routine decisions without input, reassurance, or advice from others. So that's indicative of what I was saying, right? These individuals, depending on their degree of disorder, they can't make just regular decisions as an adult that you would expect someone in that position being able to make without getting reassurance or input or advice from others. Sometimes they'll literally just be like, could you just do this for me? So is Darcy like that? No. I mean, you could make an argument, and this is why when you take one class on psychopathology, of which in that class in psychopathology, you're covering 1,000 pages, and there might literally be 1 week where you talk about personality disorders, and there might be like half an hour where you talk about dependent personality disorder, and there'll be a PowerPoint. They'll just list the criteria that are in the DSM. And, to be frank, there are some psychopathology teachers that actually don't know what they're talking about. So I've seen that before. Believe me, I work at a university. It happens sometimes. So you can't be guaranteed that you're even being told the right thing. So when you read the criteria of a lot of the personality disorders, it seems like a lot of people might qualify. But that's where clinical wisdom comes in. You have to understand what the DSM even means when they're referring. So let's look at this criterion. Difficulty making routine decisions without input, reassurance, or advice from others. Okay. Could you say that describes Darcy? You could. You could say that she has a really hard time doing things without Stacy helping her. She often asks her dad to bail her out, seemingly. She doesn't know how to navigate her romantic life without checking with her friends. So you could easily apply that criterion to Darcy, but that's not what that criterion is referring to. It's referring to what I was talking about before, which is someone that overall can't even, they believe they're incompetent. They have such low self-esteem and such a distorted point of view about themselves that not only are they terrified of doing things on their own, but they just absolutely know they're going to screw things up. It's sort of like if someone were to ask me to fly a helicopter. I don't know how to fly a helicopter. If someone said, hey, go fly that helicopter and take your family across the Grand Canyon, I'd be like, no. No, I will undoubtedly kill all of us. Like that's a disaster, or I won't even be able to get off the ground. No. Okay. That's the distortion for the dependent personality disordered individual. Asking them to go to the store on their own, asking them to get a job, asking them to get a license and start driving around, asking them to do their homework on their own, asking them to clean their room on their own, asking them to pay their bills or make a decision about who to marry, or making a decision about whether or not to have kids. Now, normally people want advice. They want some input from other people for those big decisions. But, and this isn't really, the examples I gave aren't really routine decisions. So things like, what shoes should I buy? They need a new shirt for work. And it's a simple enough thing that most people could just go to the store, go online and buy something. For the dependent personality disordered individual, depending on where they are dependent and where they're under functioning and the degree, they literally can't make that decision on their own. So is Darcy like that? No, there's no evidence. She might be, but there's no evidence. Another criterion, requires others to assume responsibilities which they should be attending to. Requires other people, usually the codependent overfunctioner, to assume responsibility which they should be attending to. Now, not everyone with dependent personality disorder meets all these criteria, but this is a common enough one where they will pressure the overfunctioner, the codependent person. The overfunctioner isn't always codependent, so I just want to be clear, but they're often the overfunctioner. The dependent on individual. They will pressure that person to do everything for them. Be like, no, I can't do it. You have to do it. They'll pressure the parent or the spouse or the friend. No, you have to do it because they're terrified. That's why. Is Darcy like that? No. Could we shoehorn data into that criterion? Yeah, but not in the way that this is meant to refer to. The next criterion, fear of disagreeing with others and risking disapproval. So again, not everyone with dependent personality disorder has this, but a certain type or style of dependent personality will. They will be terrified of disagreeing with other people because they are very worried about other people disapproving of them, because they don't want to lose the other people's help is the main thing. Another criterion, difficulty starting projects without support from others. So you could argue that Darcy might exhibit this kind of, but not in the way that dependent personality disorder people have. And certainly the way that Darcy presents in terms of starting projects without the support from others, I wouldn't say it's excessive, meaning that she has a normal amount of need from other people's support. Might there be other people who are more independent than she is? Sure. But is she out of the realm of the normal range? I wouldn't say so in terms of what's being presented. Another criterion, excessive need to obtain nurturance and support from others, even allowing others to impose themselves rather than risk rejection or disapproval. So not everyone with dependent personality has this, but this is referring to a codependent person who will impose, and so the underfunctioner, the dependent person, is very dependent on this person, cannot operate independently, and so they need this person so badly that even if this person were to bulldoze them, abuse them, or overtake them, and this person doesn't like it, they will allow it anyway because they're too needy for the nurturance and the overfunctioner to be there. Not everyone with dependent personality has this, but that is one of the presentations. Another criterion, feels vulnerable and helpless when alone. Okay, that's pretty self-explanatory. We don't have any evidence that Darcy has that. Now, again, you could shoehorn it in, right? Well, clearly, because she's always bouncing from relationship to relationship, so she feels vulnerable and helpless when she's alone. Yeah, but it's not in the sense of the dependent personality. This is why if you just read the DSM, or even if you just listen to a professor talk about this, you don't know what it is the thing. This is why lay people, particularly when it comes to personality disorders, they really make a lot of mistakes. Mostly it's about borderline or narcissism, but dependent personality is the same thing. Another criterion, desperately seeks another relationship when one ends. I'm not a fan of this criterion because there's a lot of reasons as to why someone would be this way, and it's not entirely indicative of all people with dependent personality, but it is kind of a classic criterion. Does Darcy fit that? Again, you could say yes, absolutely. She went from Jesse to Tom to Georgie to other people, but a lot of people do that. Relationships are important. Romantic companionship is important. So is it pathological, what she's doing? Is it self-destructive, what she's doing? Again, you could make that argument, but not in the sense of a personality disorder. The kinds of dependent people who will do this will say they have a divorce. So you have a dependent person and they go through a divorce and they are drawing boundaries with let's say it's an abusive partner, and they get that abusive partner out of life. They get a lot of support. And so now they're alone. I mean, they have their support system, but they don't have an overfunctioner. And so they'll feel great because, okay, I've got rid of that abusive partner. Everyone is saying that's the right thing to do. I finally feel safe. That's for the dependent person when the anxiety kicks in. Tremendous anxiety. So much so that they might even go back to the abusive partner. Okay, do we see Darcy doing that? No. Now, could you make an argument that it's in that direction? Yeah, but not in the dependent personality sense. And the last criterion, unrealistic preoccupation with being left alone and unable to take care of themselves. So it's kind of a reiteration of what I was saying earlier. Does that fit Darcy? No. And even if you shoehorned data in there, we'd really have to ask her. This criterion, you can only really know if you ask someone what's going on. Is it possible that Darcy, behind the scenes, is constantly preoccupied about being alone? Yeah, it is possible. We don't see any evidence of that, really. So you'd have to ask her, and that's not the sort of thing that they usually present on these televisions, particularly this one. So, in conclusion, do I believe that it is a viable hypothesis, or even a road to go down, with Darcy if one was to assess her that she might have dependent personality disorder? In my opinion, no. She doesn't fit even close to the quintessential criteria. Is it possible she has it? Yes, it is possible. Personality disorders are difficult to understand. Taking one class does not, even halfway through a class, does not qualify one to really understand it. And I can't stress that enough. It's not humanly possible. And when I tell this to people, even graduates, people that graduate from, because there's often, for Lacey, you're taking a class in psychopathology right now. Maybe next quarter you'll take a class on diagnostics and treatment planning or something. That's usually the sequence. And then that'll be it. Now, maybe on the job at your internship, you'll have a lot more experience and you'll have a good mentor and maybe some colleagues that you'll learn from, but maybe not. So you could graduate and have almost no understanding really of what even a personality disorder is in general. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you're dumb. It doesn't mean you're incompetent. It just means that it's a very complicated thing. And the thing that I also will say to students is, and I write this on the board, a learning curve. We all know what that looks like. It's just a curve, right, on a y and x axis. So time going this way and ability going this way. And so you start at the bottom, at the 0, 0 point, right? Or maybe a little bit higher, depending on your experience. And over time, and so I draw the line, and then I say, I am 25, 30 years into my career, and I have a lot to learn. I'm not at the top of the curve. I'm, say, 50% up the curve, right? We can all agree. So I say that to the students. We can all agree, I don't know everything about this profession. I don't know everything about psychology. I don't know everything about humans. We can agree on that, right? I don't know 50%, but we could say that in terms of the true mastery of psychology and psychotherapy, especially with the broad focus that I have, let's just say I'm at the 50% mark. Okay, so where do you think you are as a student? I say. And I put them imperceptibly basically at the bottom. Because 30 years and I'm 50% in, so let's just take a guess and say that when you're in graduate school, you basically know nothing. You know something and it's good. And you'll be effective enough as a therapist or a social worker, whatever job that you take. And you'll have people around you and you have supervisors and you'll make mistakes, but you'll get through it. But to fully recognize that it's okay to not know things and to recognize what you don't know and to not give in to Dunning-Kruger and that sort of thing. Anyway, Allison says, Darcy is like the missing piece in Shel Silverstein's book. She is looking for that piece to fuse with. Yeah, I love that book. It's behind me. As a kid, my kindergarten teacher, I think every day, would read a different Shel Silverstein poem, or I don't know, I guess it's a poem, from Where the Sidewalk Ends. And it was the highlight of our day in kindergarten. Listening to Shel, it was just so magical, and there was the illustration, and it's just so 70s. I mean, I don't know if the book came out in the 70s, but it just feels so 70s to me, and it's very dear to me. Darcy and Stacy, number 80. Fee says, just wanted to say thank you, Dr. Honda, for my cameo. It was a great surprise to get such good news, but even more surprising to get it from you. So you're welcome for the cameo. It's always fun to do that. Actually, I just got an order for one, so I got to do that soon. Rhea says, I really felt for Darcy here. So this is when Darcy gets stood up that first time and when she's driving in the car. Well, not stood up, but he calls her and says, I have to cancel. Having your date cancel at the last second is so hurtful and rude. Yeah. Holly says, I really appreciate how the thumbnails and titles on this channel aren't full of exaggeration and clickbait. Yeah, I don't understand other channels. I mean, I would understand a channel like Mr. Beast or something having a clickbait exaggeration, but I'll see adults on YouTube, like, old people like me, not just adults, but adults. People like me will be, respectable channels about science. Yeah, I see that, and I just think, I'll watch the video anyway, because I want to watch the content, because I like those channels. And two, it kind of turns me off. It kind of makes me not respect I don't know. I've never said that out loud. But yeah, the way that we make these, I mean, one, it would just be hard logistically for me to take a picture and have some weird graphic for every single video since I put out so many. But the other thing is I don't know. So Stacy actually makes she's on the other side of that wall in her office, makes the thumbnails. And what she does is she watches the video and she takes a screenshot of me, and then she takes a screenshot of the picture-in-picture that I watch, and then puts the titles and all that kind of stuff. you know, she tries to pick something where there's a little bit of intrigue, I suppose. I think. I actually don't know how she selects it, but where it's attractive, but it's an actual frame grab, or at least two, you know, one of me and one of the picture-in-picture from the actual video. And, you know, sometimes I make some weird-ass faces, so there's a lot of opportunity for Stacy to grab something. But yeah, you know, a lot of what I do on this channel, the style has to do with what I like in some channels, other YouTube channels, and what I don't like. Like, another thing that you might notice is I don't have long intros. I mean, sometimes I do when I feel like I want to really remind people of something. But often I just launch into the video, because when I'm watching videos on YouTube, because I watch a lot of YouTube videos, and there's a long ass intro, especially when they do it every single time. And it's not a, you know, if you have a sponsor, you have a sponsor, what are you going to do? But if it's just your regular channel and, you know, it's a video about Battle of the Bulge in World War II, and you have this long 5-minute intro where you're teasing certain things later on in the video. And now I'm sure I make some mistakes, and me literally yammering right now isn't the best of content, but I do think about that. I do try to make content. Like, if I ever have announcements, I do it at the end. As a podcaster, this drives me bonkers. You know, I'll listen to a new podcast, an audio podcast. People will recommend it. And for the first, so say it's a true crime podcast. And for the first 20 minutes, so, and the title is like Green River Killer. So it's an episode about a specific crime. And I'm like, okay, listen to it. And for 20 minutes, they're just chit-chatting about their day. And it's boring. Now, if you're a fan of the podcast and you love those guys, then you probably love the chit-chat because you're listening anyway, and then they get into the story. Danielle and Johan, number 1, Score Sevi, says, during my final year in college, I also dreamed of forfeiting all mortal... So I was talking about how I was stressed out, and I was wondering if Danielle was having that feeling of just overwhelmed feelings of her life, whatever those overwhelmed feelings are, and that desire to just like make a drastic change and move out of the country to Dominican Republic. And it feels like it would be wonderful, even though it's too drastic of a change. You might be able to just move to the suburbs of New York, or even just to North Carolina, where the property or the housing prices aren't as expensive. Anyway, so I was talking about how when I was really stressed out in graduate school, I had this persistent fantasy of becoming a monk in a cave in a mountain. And I mean, I wasn't serious about it, but it was something that I thought, it was like, oh, it'd be so nice just to wake up and sit in the opening of my cave and watch the sunrise and just have no possessions, and I would have no career aspirations, and I wouldn't have to deal with anyone. Anyway, so Scorsevi says, during my final year in college, I also dreamed of forfeiting all mortal possessions and becoming a monk. I guess graduate school just does something to people that makes them want to leave society. Yeah. And then Underscore says, Dr. Kirk, thanks for sharing your monk fantasy story. About 15 years ago, I did that very thing. I sold everything to live as a forest monk for a number of years in South and Southeast Asia. I do regret it, though. Like you mentioned, I'm sure the fantasy would have naturally fallen to the wayside if I would have just simply lowered my stress. Not to mention all the men that would come into these monasteries to live for years as monks, abruptly leaving their children and partners. Yeah, interesting. So you actually did it. Actually lived my fantasy and found out it wasn't for you. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I knew that. I just thought like, well, that sounds extreme. But it sure did seem nice to me. Danielle and Johan, number 2, Chica Libre says, I don't think Americans understand just what a difference it. So I was talking about how this is when Danielle and Johan were arguing about coming to the States, and she was like, the American dream is over. And, you know, I was talking about all the nuances because, you know, there's a lot of nuances there. I don't think Americans understand just what a difference it makes for people to move to the United States. When Johan says he knows people who moved and made something from nothing in the U.S., he's not talking about people starting companies and getting rich. It's really easy to get employed in the U.S. if you're willing to work, I think, compared to other countries, other communities. Because certainly there are some people in the United States that have a hard time finding work. But so they're saying it's really easy to get employed in the U.S. if you're willing to work. And although the money doesn't get you extravagant things, just having an apartment, a car, being able to buy a burger from a restaurant is a dream for many people. Yeah, and I think for us privileged Americans, at least for a certain class of privileged Americans, it is hard to really understand that. There's millions and millions, billions of people around the world who, like you say, would do anything just to have a minimum wage job, have an apartment, a car, being able to buy a burger from a restaurant, like a really used car. You know, it's a dream for many people compared to where they're at, because all the other things that come with it, the stability, the health care, the security. You know, there are communities, a lot of communities around the world. And I think Rose's community was kind of like this. She might have even talked about it, where they basically don't even have any infrastructure. There's no police. There's no fire department. There's no health board. There's no reassurances that the food is safe to eat. You know, there are basic things that as Americans aren't working perfectly, but are there, you know, and most of the time are probably working and helping. Not to mention, you can support your whole family, like Dr. Honda mentioned, you know, meaning that if Johan came to the States and got, you know, a little bit, worked really hard, worked his way up at a job, that he could actually support his entire family back in Dominican Republic. In my country, kids don't have food to eat. And it's not like they can go to a food bank or just eat white bread for dinner. They literally don't eat at all. With an uncle in the US sending dollars, they wouldn't go hungry, I think referring to Johan. Yeah. It's depressing when communities, countries, economies like the United States are just chugging along and people are worried about the things that people worry about. And there are children in whole swaths of communities around the world, children and people who don't have anything to eat at all. And Bill Gates talks about this sometimes, about how little it would take for us as a human race to rectify that. You know, sometimes it feels like it's impossible to fix, and it's not. There are things you can do that, but there's no money to be made in feeding poor people. And that's what America and a lot of the world is oriented around, is capitalism, is profit. And so you need governments to do this. You need our elected officials to, unless we change the whole system, if we're going to stick with a capitalist socialist system, you have to tax us and actually spend the money on feeding people overseas. And of course, with our current landscape, not only do you have conservatives who in general are not a fan of that in terms of governments doing this, but you have people all over the board politically who just don't care or would rather tweet about it instead of actually doing something. You know, I'm often talking about the good we could do if we actually banded together as a people and actually allocated funds and resources, which means taxes, which means actually the government has to collect those taxes. You know, there are charitable organizations that do this sort of thing, but I think we've proven that charities can't do it all. And when I think about literally tomorrow, we could start feeding every person on the planet. And I know it's complicated and I'm not an expert, but at least we could try. And literally tomorrow, we could start that process. You know, maybe in a year, we got the infrastructure and the supply lines all kind of worked out. Clean water, you know, there's such a, actually Mr. Beast, he raised a bunch of money and installed, I think in at least one town and somewhere in Africa, I believe, where it gave the town clean water, like a well that had a filter. And so, yeah, it's sad to me. So Chloe says, oh, I can personally speak to that. So I think Chloe's talking about coming to the States after idolizing coming to the States, meaning they idolized the United States. Oh, I can personally speak to that. I moved from Munich, Germany to a rural town in Kentucky when I was 11, and I was shocked. I imagined it to be completely like the movies. I expected everything to be better and cooler. I quickly realized that it was the opposite. Everyone thought I was so cool because I moved here from Europe. It's been 15 years and I still haven't adjusted. I cannot wait to move out of Kentucky. It's nice for some people, but just not for me. Yeah, Kentucky has some nice places, but yeah, certainly if you're looking for the glitz and the glamour and, you know, think of Yara in sort of, well, anyway. Danielle and Johan number 3, AC says, Danielle is wrong for speaking to him this way, but he doesn't really understand. I am an immigrant, and every person you tell back home about how expensive it is to live in the United States doesn't believe it. And then when they come here, they realize it. Interesting. Yeah, I can see that. Alicia McIntyre, good old Alicia, one of the Alicias, says, I totally agree about the myopic view of many New Yorkers. It is so annoying how they think about their city as the center of the universe. Danielle is literally more willing to move to another country and destroy her marriage before considering moving to another part of the U.S. Yeah, I mean, we don't know Danielle's decision-making process. And certainly I don't want to say that all New Yorkers have a myopic view and think of themselves as superior. Certainly that's not the case, but I've run into it a few times. Jen and Rishi, number 1, Sani says, German here, it is really interesting to hear how that insanity quote, right, so I was saying, because someone was saying, like, that's literally the definition of insanity when you continue to do the same thing over and over again expecting different results. And I'm like, that's not the definition of insanity. People, stop saying that. German here, it is really interesting to hear how that insanity quote can have 2 different interpretations, and I have never thought about it that way. Here in Germany, we have the same quote, supposedly said by Einstein, but we have 2 meanings for insanity. One is for being extremely mentally ill, but the other is just being crazy or foolish in a non-pathological way, if that makes sense. Yeah, well, that's kind of the same in the United States, but I don't think we should be using the word insane in that way. I don't think it's a terrible usage of the word, and I'll allow for drifting of words and meanings and whatnot, but it does have a oppressive notion for people who have severe mental illness or even just mental illness in general. To equate them with being foolish or crazy is something that society has been doing for centuries, and it needs to stop. So there's so many other, plus I'm pretty sure when people say that phrase, they literally believe it is the definition of insanity. You know, when I hear people say that, they don't say things like, well, you know how the saying goes, the definition of insanity is blah, blah, blah. I think people literally think, because people bandy it about so much, I think people literally believe the definition of insanity is doing, and I think they think when someone has mental illness, that's also what they do. You know, it's this idea that someone with schizophrenia is just sitting there repeatedly trying to do the same thing and expecting different results, and it's not happening. And I just feel like that whole realm just needs to stop. There's so many other phrases you could say. For example, it's really foolish, or even the definition of foolishness is to do the same thing over and over again expecting different results. Just say that. Why are we using the word insanity? Now, I will allow that in Germany, it's obviously a different language, different meanings, so I can't comment on that, but I can comment on the United States. Habeas Humor, good old Habeas Humor says, they're misusing the term catfish. They mean honey trap. Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, catfish is something different, which we understand. Nicole and Mahmoud, number 1. Rosh says, I grew up in a Muslim household in the United States. I had one particular older brother who for some reason felt the need to control how I dressed. As an American teenager, it was really upsetting for someone to dictate what I wore on a daily basis. Yeah, I bet. All to this day, the arguments about clothing are very minimally about culture and more about the impulse to control women. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, why does the culture have that notion to begin with? I mean, why do you think it exists to begin with? Why do you think in Iran you have women that are saying, you can't do this to me anymore, and the men in the patriarchy and in politics and in the military and the police force, they can't have that. Women cannot make the choice. It's a symbol. If we control how you look and how you dress, then it symbolizes that we have control over your life and you are not a full citizen. You can't make a decision for yourself. People can make their own decisions about what they want to dress or what culture they want to live in, but I don't know. From my American Seattle perspective, it just looks like culturally sanctioned control of women. It just does. And I'm not a fan, as you can tell. I won't begrudge particular individuals for living within their culture or even loving their culture, but I do think that these things should be looked at, and of course they are being looked at. A lot of people are looking at it and actually being killed for looking at it, you know, protesting. So, yeah. Leah says, I grew up in a high-control Christian pocket, and when I was 15, the girls were told that they were causing our male teachers to sin because of what we were wearing. The article of clothing they had taken issue with was scarves. Yes, scarves. They said it drew attention to our chests. Amber says, as an anthropologist, I find the idea of acknowledging your culture fascinating. Right, so I was talking about how for Nicole, she was saying for Mahmoud, well, I realize it's a cultural thing, but I know that it's wrong. And that is so when you are swimming in the culture of mainstream and dominance, as white people are in white America, in a white community, then culture to you is other cultures, and normal to you is your life and what other white people are doing and saying and believing and, planning. The things that you experience around you are normal, and then you see other cultures and you're like, ooh, that's cultural. It's like in the grocery store when you see the ethnic aisle is the other. And of course, the default is normal, right? No, everything is cultural. You could argue everything is ethnic. So when I was, I don't know how Nicole feels about it, but it just sort of had that feel to it that she was identifying her point of view as normal and his point of view, Mahmoud's point of view, as cultural. And what I was saying is her point of view is also cultural. It's okay. It doesn't mean it invalidates it. And I feel like a lot of people will think that. It's just like, no, it's not cultural. It's normal. It's okay. It's like, no, every idea that we have could be argued was given to us in part or influenced by culture. The things that are passed down, the ideas, the meanings, the things that we consider important are all passed down to us and to your parents, and we will continue to do it. I'm doing it right now. The things that I talk about is a propagation of culture. I am a manifestation of a particular culture, and we just need to acknowledge that. So that's what I was saying. As an anthropologist, I find the idea of acknowledging your culture fascinating. Dr. Honda, you were spot on. Oh, thanks. Most people can clearly identify their cultural norms if they are in the minority. And why is it important to recognize? Well, I think it's important to recognize because when we understand this notion, this truth, then we can look at it. We can look at our culture. We can look at our assumptions. We can look at the people around us and maybe pick the good and reject the bad, because there's a lot of that in every culture. Whereas if we just consider it as normal and the way things are, then we're not given that opportunity. Jantra says, I'm an American woman, married 10 years to an Egyptian man. I've never covered my hair and have never been asked to. I wear exactly what I wear in the US, in Egypt, except I put a t-shirt on under sleeveless dresses. Plenty of women in Egypt wear tight clothing and don't cover their hair. They work jobs and pursue careers. There is a pretty significant chasm in Egypt between strict fundamentalist families and more liberal families. For some reason, the more fundamentalist men tend to choose foreign women. People are extremely judgy there in Egypt, and as a foreign woman living there, you have to multiply that times 10, the judgmentalness. Interesting. Nicole and Mahmoud number 2, the infamous, says, this is the best episode ever. I loved seeing the pics. Oh, so in this episode, I was talking about sibling order, and I was talking about, because they were bandying about false information and pseudoscience about sibling order. And so I started talking about my grandpa, like I said, in sports. This is the best episode ever. I love seeing the pictures and family history. Well, that's nice, because, when I put stuff in there, I'm always like, people don't want to watch this stupid stuff about me. And I try to limit it, honestly. But I don't know, I find it to be demonstrative of the ideas I'm talking about. I find a little bit of tangent or visual aid can help that. That's how I teach. That's even how I am as a therapist. I'll talk about this stuff as a therapist. I feel like when you provide a story or context, it can flesh out what we're talking about. Your grandpa was for sure a star. Looks like a model star. Looks like a movie star or a model. Yeah, he did. But African Americans used sports as a way to integrate as well. I had no idea that Japanese Americans did that too. What a fascinating history. Nicole and Mahmoud number 3, Bo says, Thank you for explaining introversion. I'm so tired of people conflating introversion with shyness or social anxiety and awkwardness. Yeah. Good old Alicia McIntyre says, someone once tried to tell me that introverts can never be lonely. Yeah. Yeah. What they're confusing is schizoid, which I'm going to do a deep dive soon. Otter says, I wish I had seen this when I was younger. I had an eating disorder in my late teens, and this whole refusal to eat food prepared by others as a way of receiving love, my dad specifically in my case, this contributed so significantly to my relational issues that are ongoing over a decade later. So it sounds like for this individual, the dad would express love through eat my food, and this individual didn't want to, and it caused a lot of relational issues between this person and their father that are ongoing. Yeah, absolutely. And I've treated people with eating disorders with this being a pretty major factor. It is weird how some families are about food. I mean, it's weird. Not just odd, but like really problematic. And when you're in that, especially if you're born into that family, it's just normal. I mean, I've talked to people in their 40s and will reveal to me things about the way they were raised and the way they continue to interact with their family around food. And I'll just be like, what? What are they doing? What's happening? And they'll be like, so is that not normal? Now, I won't shame them, but I'll say, I think we have the reason as to why this eating disorder has emerged. It's never that simple, but it's all this way, right? With my family, there's a lot of things about my family that I just thought everyone did. Like one of the things that around food in my family was I would go to my friend's house. They were often white people. And me and my siblings would always marvel about this, that in white people's homes, there was space in between the different foods that you ate for dinner. So there would be potatoes and the vegetables and then the protein. You got chicken, and then you can see plate. And then you have the peas, and then you can see plate, and then you have the potatoes. In Japanese American culture, it's just all kind of, and there's so much of it that there's no room for plate. There's always just this massive amount of rice. That's my mouth water. I'm thinking of Loco Moco. I had that the other day. You might have seen on Instagram I was eating a Spam musubi. That's where I got it from. Anyway, we always thought that was normal. Like, because occasionally that might happen to be like, I don't have enough food here. I can see plate. And then we go to other homes. They're like, oh. Now, it wasn't destructive. It didn't cause problems for me anyway. But it just really highlights how we take our family culture and the pattern as normal and as unquestioned. Going on here, Chris and Jamie, number 1. Brittany says, is it cheating if someone abandons you for 30 days? I think so. Yeah. I don't know. So Chris says Jamie cheated on me, but then later revealed that, I think Jamie might have said this, that Chris ghosted her for a month or two, and then Jamie started dating someone else. Yeah, I don't know. The whole circumstance around that, and maybe as I watch, and I haven't watched many of the episodes of this season because I've been watching other things. I plan on getting to it, so I don't know if it happens later. But the way they talked about that, I was just like, Because on one hand, you're thinking, wow, Jamie, like, very quickly went to someone else and another American. And this other American is contacting Chris and saying, you know that Jamie's just out to get money. But then the way Chris talked about it, it just seemed like, what's going on? I don't know. Maybe we'll never find out. I mean, Jamie certainly seems like a very genuine person, at least the episodes I've seen so far. Let's see. Chris and Jamie number 2. Margarita says, Dr. Honda, thank you for speaking about this. So I gave a typical scenario of how opiate addiction develops in people, and you can listen to that episode. Dr. Honda, thank you for speaking about this. My ex had a history of mental illness and a lot of childhood trauma. I watched him go through the cycle you described beat by beat. So I was talking about how you get prescribed the opiate because you have a procedure or an injury, and then you take the pill and you're just like, oh my God, I've never felt so good. Give me more of that. And then it just a long road, and then eventually you've lost your job and you're taking heroin and you're alone, and it's awful. So now it doesn't always go down that route. Sometimes the person can function at their work and at home, but the addiction is really hard to kick. So I watched him go through this cycle you described beat by beat. In the beginning, I didn't realize how lucid and manipulative pill addicts in particular can be. Yeah. I mean, the reason why when you're addicted to pills, you can manage well, because when people are addicted to opiates, heroin included, they don't typically want to get high. Maybe sometimes like when they want to relax at night or on the weekends or something, but typically throughout the day, they're just trying to stave off the withdrawal symptoms. That's all that they're doing. And with pills, it's easy to dial in the dosage, right? Because it's written in milligrams, right? So like, okay, if I take this amount, then I won't be out of it and I can function at work. But if I take below that, then the withdrawal symptoms it's really awful, the withdrawal symptoms. The problem with heroin is it's unregulated, so you don't know what you're getting. You don't even know if it's heroin. You know, it could be fentanyl in it, right? So, and your drug dealer might not even know what's in it because they got it from someone that doesn't know what's in it anyway. So with heroin, you're taking a gamble. You're like, well, I think this is the right dose, but who knows what the concentration is there. So that's why when you see someone nodding off because they took too much heroin or opiates, it's usually because they made a mistake, because they weren't trying to get to that point. Sometimes they are, but not usually. And the people that I treated that had opiate addiction, they all functioned very well in life. They had good jobs, typical Seattle life, tech jobs, family, the whole thing. The problem is that with pills, they get too expensive, and then you have to turn to heroin, and then that's when the problems start to really get bad. And of course, your tolerance goes up, so you need more and more. I didn't notice his sweaty palms and constant nausea and mood swings. He didn't fall into heroin until after I left him, and then he got into meth. He died when he was hit by a vehicle. I still can't get over the constant guilt for leaving him so that our daughter wouldn't have to see him getting worse. But I know many people who are affected by this, and I hope continuing to educate, and I hope you will continue to educate people in the future. Yeah, well, I'm sorry that happened, Margarita, to your former partner. It's awful. If we had more education, if he had received, I'm guessing, proper treatment prior to encountering the pill, the first experience with opiates, I'm guessing that things could have gone in a different direction. Of course, it's not your fault. It's society's fault, in my opinion. Janelle says, wow, I'm very touched and feel so seen and accepted by you, Dr. Honda. This was a spectacular video. You were so compassionate and huge-hearted in the beginning of the video. I truly felt like you were telling my story, I think, about the addiction story. I had a lot of trauma growing up, and when I hurt my knee, because that's another part of it, is that the individual has trauma, sometimes very obvious trauma, sometimes not, and the person is just in a constant state of pain and anxiety and uncertainty, and it feels just normal. And sometimes they might know, it's just like, I feel like I'm suffering more than other people are, but sometimes they're just like, well, isn't everyone just suffering? And they're just always trying to get through the day. And then when I hurt my knee and had to have surgery at 17, they put me on strong painkillers. For the first time in my life, I felt relaxed, happy, energetic, and my anxiety was gone. Enter opiate addiction and pure hell for the next 2 decades. I've been clean for over 8 years now. Yay me. Yes, yay you, Janelle. There is hope to recover, so never give up. So many thanks to you, Dr. H, for being so kind and understanding, for being you. Yeah, well, you deserve that, and what a feat that you have done, Janelle. That is just fantastic. Alma says, I got into a car accident, and I told the doctor that I have an addiction, and I'm okay avoiding the pain meds, and he sat there for 20 minutes trying to convince me to take them. He even said that these pain meds weren't addictive, but they were Vicodin. It was very annoying. Yeah, absolutely. So one, there's a lot of factors in this. One is physicians want to help, and there are many situations where a physician will be prescribing something, whether it's a pill or some other treatment, and you will have a patient that will be resisting for reasons that don't make any sense, like vaccines, for example, or other kinds of medication, other kinds of treatments. Like, say someone has treatable cancer. Say it's like early stage breast cancer, and the patient is like, well, I don't want any kind of intervention because I believe in a religion where you're not supposed to do that or whatever. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up. Well, for a lot of physicians, they would be like, but there's a chance you could die, and we have treatments, and they work usually. And I really think so there are times when physicians, I think it's right for them and prudent for them to really try to convince, right? Within reason. So I think physicians are used to that. And when they hear someone in pain and they're refusing meds for what they believe to be not a valid reason, then they're going to pressure you because they don't want you to suffer. The other problem is that the industry, right, the people who sold these pills, benefited from physicians not understanding that it was addictive. And there was a lot of effort, a lot of lobbying, a lot of trying to convince the physicians, the prescribers, to believe it wasn't addictive. Also, once people started to become addicted to these pills and dying, the pharmaceutical companies did not want to be liable for it, and the doctors didn't want to either. So there was a lot of efforts to suppress the truth and to deny the science, and also come up with science that benefited them by claiming that it wasn't addictive. It's sort of like with the cigarette companies saying it's not associated with cancer. There's a lot, years and years of science and funding poured into these companies that would produce research that supported that, right? And it was along those lines because of course opiates are addictive. And we've known that for a very long time, but because these organizations have so much money, they can just bulldoze over. And so it's possible that your doctor literally was totally convinced because of what was being pumped into his head that opiates weren't addictive. And I'm guessing that's what happened. And I feel like it's definitely changed. In fact, I'm pretty sure the mainstream behavior from physicians now is they're actually pretty hesitant to prescribe a lot of medications because of this pendulum swing and the pushback on this sort of thing. So sometimes you might actually want an opiate and they won't give it to you because they're trying to be careful. I know that happens as well. Don't quote me on any of that. Anyway, and really don't quote me on anything because, what do I know? And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.